I intended to do an episode of the Hard Times Chronicles called Aunt Colleen and the F Words. And you saw on the previous episode that that turned out to be way too much to do in one episode. In fact, I had a lot of time, trouble getting just an episode about Aunt Colleen's friend and my friend Patsy Faust covered in a decent amount of time in the episode that I finally decided to do for the friends part of the F words. The other two words were faith and family. And today I'm going to try to make the second in this series, and I'm going backwards through the list. Today's episode of the Hard Times Chronicles is family. Aunt Colleen, family, and my family, and in some instances that's the same thing. I had 16 aunts. That's A-U-N-T-S, aunts. Had 16 of them. I count aunts as being sisters of my mother or father and wives of my mother's brothers and my father's brothers. I was surprised to find out just a few years ago that everybody doesn't count everybody like that their aunt. One guy told me he counted his mother and dad's sisters as his aunts. And the brothers, those women they married, weren't his aunts. So I don't know. I thought he was nuts, but then several other people chimed in and said that's the way they counted it too. And you had to do that because those guys could divorce the aunt, and then what do you got? You got somebody else. Well, in my case, that did happen, and but that woman that got left behind was still my aunt. In fact, it happened a couple of times. One of my uncles had a wife named Molly, and he divorced her and later married a woman named Pauline. Well, both of them were my aunts. Molly was the mother of some cousins that were close to my age, and I knew her a long time, and she was my Aunt Molly, and that didn't change because my uncle divorced her. The other situation was my mother's brother, Uncle Max. He had a wife named Janet. He divorced her, and he married a woman named Mary Hitchcock. And I don't know why they did this, but my family always referred to the woman as not Mary, but Mary Hitchcock. So I had an aunt named Janet and an aunt named Mary Hitchcock, and I never knew either one of them. They were divorced and out of the family before I was old enough to remember them. And my dad, he had a sister named Corny May, who actually was, he never knew her either. She was born and died before he was born. So he never knew Corny May. I never knew Corny May, but Corny May was my dad's sister, so she was my aunt. Now, apart from those three, I knew all the rest of them. Corny May, Bertha, Christine, Willie, Gladys, Ruby, Edith, Elsie, Molly, Pauline, LaWanda, Janet, Mary Hitchcock, Ruby, Dot, and Colleen. Is that 16? Yeah. And you're probably saying you counted Ruby twice, but I didn't. I actually had two aunts named Aunt Ruby. One was my mother's brother's wife named Ruby, and the other was one of my dad's sisters' name was Ruby. So I had 16 aunts, and I've already told you I never knew 3 of them. 5 more of them lived in California most of my life, so I had very little interfacing with them. There was another 5 that lived either in Arkansas or Florida, or part of the time in Florida and part of the time in Indianapolis. They were a long ways from me, so I had a little less interface with them. And then there was Aunt Dot, who lived 30 miles away from me, and Aunt Colleen, who lived pretty much my whole life in the same town I lived in. I would say of the 16, if you took the exposure I had to Aunt Colleen and put it here, and you put the exposure I had to the other 15 here, and added it all up together and multiplied it by some multiple, the exposure I had to Aunt Colleen would exceed that multiple of the exposure I had to the other 15. So it's not really that Aunt Colleen was my favorite aunt. She's the one that had the most influence on me because she's the one I was most exposed to. Aunt Dot probably was second. She was from Bloomfield, and the other one managed to get in third place from Arkansas. Her name was Edith. And those three women were my favorite three aunts. And that's probably the only time you're going to hear me say something like that, because I have rules about family, and one of the things is you're not supposed to have favorites. But there are exceptions where I allow it, and we'll have a video about that. Let's not go into that any further. We're back to Aunt Colleen and the F words, and today's word is family. So we'll start with me, and I'll try to keep it brief. Family is of utmost importance to me. I love my family. I love having them around me. I love it that we all get together. I love it that they all get along with one another and want to be with one another. And family values, family closeness, family love is an extremely important thing to me and to my wife Betty. So I could go on and on about family, but I'm not going to. I think I've said enough. I think you understand how I feel about family, and you'll hear other views of mine as time goes on in these videos about family and how family's supposed to be in my mind. Betty, my wife, and I both come from families who pretty much felt that way. I mean, we didn't just have an accident to get to the place we feel about families. We were both from families that family meant a whole lot to. I began this the series on family, last week, middle to late last week, when I did the first part of this series on friends, and it ended up being a two-part series with about Patsy Faust, my friend, Aunt Colleen's friend. If you haven't seen that, go back and pick that up. Two-part series. I think it's episodes 10 and 11. I'm going to pick up today where I left off there, except you can see it's a different setting. I was up in the Sojourner room that day, had on different clothes. My hair was 5 or 6 days shorter than this. We still need to get the barbershops open. I'm about to look like a goat, but Aunt Colleen was to her side, my mother's side of my family, what I'm trying to be with these videos for my family, my children, future generations down from me. They're just things I think that are important that don't get lost from their family history. And I'm trying to make a record of them so that they'll know these things. And I'm going to talk about that again a little bit more in a minute. But I want to say that Aunt Colleen, for my mother's side of the family, was that person in spades. My mother passed very little of that kind of information on to me. Although one of the things that she did tell me every time we went to Bloomfield and came home was, your grandpa built that barn. pointing to a barn, which you've seen a picture of probably already in these videos. That was important to her, for me to know that her dad built that barn. But Aunt Colleen was that person on Mom's side of the family that retained information, retained stories, made sure that you heard the stories, made sure that you understood how they related to you within the structure of the family, made sure that you know who was who and what the time period was and what the significance of things were, why they were in Greene County at the farm instead of in Bedford during that period in their life, all the kind of things that were part of family history. Aunt Colleen wanted the family to remember those things, and she went to a great deal of effort to see to it that it happened. And she had lots of pictures and saved lots of little things. In fact, one of my biggest regrets about the auctions that Aunt Colleen had, and I went to both of them, and you're going to hear about things from those auctions throughout these videos from now until I'm through making them. But what I started to say was my regret about all that is that I didn't just buy everything Aunt Colleen owned, because just about everything she owned had a story with it. And the day of that auction, I saw so many smalls that I know she could have told me things about that I'd not heard. And they went, I just was a man of limited means that day, and I had a goal, and you're going to hear about that goal later in a different video as well. In fact, it was going to be the first video of this whole series, and now already it's not going to be in the top 15 probably, but you're going to hear about it one of these days. And she was right in the middle of all the things that I remember as a child growing up. When we would have family get-togethers, I would say a very disproportionate amount of those were hosted by Aunt Colleen. They were at her house. In most families, they happen at the grandma's house, and we had plenty at my grandma's house. I'm not saying we didn't, but especially in later years when Aunt Colleen had that big vacant lot beside her house, a lot of the things that were hosted by her. And we had all kinds of other places where we had family get together. The shelter park at Wilson Park was one that comes to memory. And I'm talking about the big one that's up on Denson Avenue, or I guess that's Park Avenue, up there by the Horseshoe Pit. We had lots of family gatherings there. We had family gatherings at the open shelter house that's on down around the circle in Wilson Park many times. We had family gatherings at what's now known as Wiley Park. Then it was known as the FOP Park, in that building on that place. We had them at Otis Park in the shelter house at the top of the hill above the 13th green. But more than that, we probably had more of them on those open shelters on that road that winds up from where the golf course clubhouse is to the top of the hill, the shelter house. Along the left or north side of that road there, I think 3, maybe 4. I think they built in the past 10 years, I think they built another one there that didn't used to be there. They built a new one, tried to replicate the old ones. I know they went in and renovated all those and saved them. I'm glad they did that, because that was a big part of my family history. But they had those big circular shaped concrete patios with the fireplace and the wall around them built out of the same thing that the shelter house is built out of, that wall that probably every bit of it come out of Leatherwood Creek. And they built walls and buildings at Otis Park during the WPA days. We had family gatherings there. And finally then, you can't mention these gatherings without mentioning Aunt Dot. They lived in Bloomfield, and they had a yard that in those days seemed like it was 20 acres to me. It probably maybe was an acre and a half. And it nowadays, when I stand there and look at that place, I think, man, I used to think this place was huge, and it's not really. It's kind of small, but it was out in the country, and the yard was big enough to accommodate a whole bunch of little rascals running around and keep them out of trouble, and plenty of things for them to do. And so we had lots of gatherings like that as well at Aunt Dot's house. But for the most part, Aunt Colleen was right in the middle of every bit of it. And so her approach to family and family values is a part of why I am like I am, but I would say that we're very similar in how valuable family time was and is to both of us. We're in the midst now of shelter in place, I think is the politically correct term to use. Shelter in place period in our country because of this COVID-19 that's going on. And it has disrupted everybody's life, I'm sure, but it has disrupted mine in a way that I never imagined could happen because I'm a person whose family, and I'm talking about most of it, all my children and about half my grandchildren come to my house. One of my great-grandsons calls it Family Sunday. After church on Sunday, a great majority of them show up out here to hang out with Grandma and Grandpa and enjoy the amenities of country living in the 15 acres that we own and the way we try to tailor it to their needs. They're out here. And it's been 4 or 5 weeks now since that's happened, and I miss that. I mean, the closest thing we've come to it is some of the great grandkids have been out here with their mom mushroom hunting, and Betty and I stand in the doorway and wave at them when they get out up by the barn and head out. But we're keeping our distance from them. They're out in the public. We're elderly and susceptible, and no one wants to be the one that gave Grandma and Grandpa the coronavirus. So I'm ready for this to be over with because it's affecting what's normal for my family life. Already I've turned this into, I went somewhere I didn't intend to go. This video is going to be, I can tell you, started out to be one video. It's going to be probably at least 3. What I'm going to do today and how I'm going to finish this family part of the video is I'm going to take you around this room. This happens to be the living room of my house, and as I got to thinking about how to take this video somewhere with structure and not make it last 21 more videos like it looked like it's going to from the start until now. I haven't got very far with it. I thought, there's things in that one room. Mostly when you get in a room in my house, you can go around the room, 75% of it, you can say, Dad bought that at auction. And there's a story about that auction and that whatever that thing is. In this room, as you go around it, you can say, Dad bought that at auction about a few things. But most of the things in this room are things that were associated with my family. And so that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to go about the room and just talk about those things that have family history. You see my laptop sitting here on this table in front of me, and I'm going to tell you that over a period of time, I have written short things about things in my life that I didn't want lost. And I may have told you this already, but if I did, I'm going to tell you again. After I wrote my first book, Observations, Basketball and Bird Dogs, or Bird Dogs and Basketball, the title of it. After I wrote that book and went through the experience of having it published, I thought I would make a second book out of this collection of stories that I had about these family things that were, some of them you're going to see today. Because I had a lot of stories already written, and I had some in my head that weren't written that I could write. And I was going to, I was going to make my second book a compilation of those stories, and I was going to go around and take pictures of those things, like this Aunt Colleen thing in there. There's a story about it already written and stored away on my computer. I was going to take those and make a second book out of them, and then I started thinking about this video thing, and a friend of mine started making videos, and so then I decided, instead of making a book, those books are, I need to have something like that done, but it's pretty expensive to make a book. I'm never going to get that money back. I decided not to make a book, but to make videos using those stories. And you can already tell that when I start telling a story, it takes about 4 or 5 times longer than it should. And I've apologized to you that already, and I'll apologize to you more, but I'm not going to change that. One of the reasons I'm not going to change it is my #1 fan on these videos is my daughter, Shannon. She's my oldest girl. She is liking these videos, and she looks at them as an opportunity to listen to her daddy talk, and why shouldn't I cater to her? She's the one who likes to hear me talk more than anybody else, and so she likes the way they're going, and then I'm going to just keep doing them like that for her sake and for my sake. That's the way I am. These stories that I've written, however, I write the same way that I talk. I just take off and I write it down. But when I'm going to think about publishing that writing, it's different because I'm redundant. I say the same things 3 times when I only need to say it once. Sentences are 10 times longer than they need to be, and they can be cut down. I put details in there that aren't needed for the sake of the writing. And so my writing process starts out like my speaking process, but then I refine it down to where I'm happy that I've said what I need to say, and I've said it in an efficient way, and that's what my writing ends up being. And when I try to do that to these videos, I can't accomplish that same succinct efficiency. I end up editing so much of it that I don't like it when I get done. So there's a difference in my writing and my talking. For the sake of you people that aren't my family members, that for some reason or other like my videos, I'm going to, for the sake of this video, read to you what I have written, because it's a whole lot shorter than anything I'm going to say. Now, there's going to be times when I can't totally just do that and go on. And in the very first one I do today, there is going to be a time when I can't just leave it like that. But that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to try to read to you what I've written and let it go on from there. This is the preview I promised you. You've seen this already in a previous video. I think it was Hard Times Chronicles number 3. It's in an episode about Aunt Colleen and my friend Richard Day bidding against each other. Actually, he wasn't even bidding, but he wanted to in this for this walnut cupboard top. If you haven't seen that, go back and find that episode and look at it. As we go around the room, I'll give you the preview. That is a wardrobe. It belonged to my sister Diane. We'll talk about it again in a minute. We continue around the room. You've seen that little nightstand already too. There is a rather large picture of a handsome guy. I've been looking at that handsome guy in that picture frame for, I don't know, 60 some years. I'm going to talk about that too in a minute. Continue around the room, and there is, that's Jess Bagshaw box. You won't hear about that in this video because it has nothing to do with my family, but you will hear about that in a future video. Back up and get a look at this. You're going to hear about that in this video too. Uh, it's a primitive yellow poplar cupboard. Got a TV sitting on top of it. In that corner, that's an oak stack bookcase missing its base. You're going to hear about that in the video. It actually belongs to my sister Amy. This wardrobe is yellow poplar and finished in dark satin walnut stain. Aunt Colleen loved this combination of wood and finish. She can be blamed for influencing me, but it's pretty easy to see I like it too. This wardrobe was originally of the knockdown variety. I first saw it at a Robinson auction. It was lying on the ground under a huge maple tree in the front yard of an old Victorian farmhouse near Campbellsburg. It had been mostly disassembled, or it had fallen apart as a result of being stripped in a dip tank. The only things still assembled were the two drawers. At first appearance, it was merely a stack of fuzzy-looking poplar boards. It took me a while to figure out what it was. I managed to buy it for $80. Diane first saw it in my barn. I had reassembled the doors, sanded them, and applied a coat of walnut stain. The rest of it, except for some sanding, was pretty much as I had found it. I didn't want to, but Diane talked me into selling it to her for the $80 I had invested. A terribly weak moment this was, and something which rarely happened. I can't remember doing anything quite as rash, even for something one of my daughters may have wanted. Diane took the pile of boards to Bloomfield and had Uncle Cobb make some shelves, a cornice molding for the top, and assemble it into a permanent tall cupboard. He then completed the staining process and finished the whole project with a satin finish. Diane covered the shelves with a dark blue patterned vinyl. Wardrobes such as this one have waned in popularity and aren't worth as much as they once were. Because this wardrobe was Diane's, it is special to me. That's what I wrote. And you can see that if I'd have just sat and tried to tell you that story, it probably would have took 20 minutes. But you got the information you needed, and I didn't leave anything out. It says here that I paid $80 for the wardrobe, and that I then sold it to Diane for $80. And I lament about not really wanting to do that and having a weak moment. But the original version of this story that I had written and then edited to that short form is a little more involved in that, and I can't just go off and leave it like that here. I've got to give you the long version of it. Recovering my $80 was technically true, but on the day that this transaction began, I was up in the barn, and like the story says, I was working on the cupboard, and Diane came out, and I think Betty told her I was up in the barn. She came up there and kind of, the sliding doors to the barn were open, and I was in there with my back to the doors, and Diane kind of snuck up on me and startled me, and she wanted to know what I was doing. And I told her, and I showed her the cupboard, and she immediately had a vision for the thing, and wanted it, and began soliciting me to sell it to her. And I think originally I told her that when I got done with it, it would be, north of $200 for what I'd want for it. And she asked, like, what would it be just like right now if I quit doing what I was doing and sold it to her, and she finished it. And I said, Diane, I really don't want to do that. I got, these things are hard to come by. I don't get to have them very often. There's a good profit potential here. And I was trying to talk her out of even buying it, but she was persistent and wanted to buy it. And so I think she maybe offered me to begin with something like $200. And I said, Diane, you don't even have $200. I said, I know what your situation is right now, and you don't need to be buying this thing. And she said, well, if you could sell it to me cheaper than that. And finally, I agreed to sell it to her for the $80. And she Diane used to do this little thing with her lips. She kind of pursed her lips together, and I don't know whether it was something that she thought made her look like a little girl, but she always did it when she was trying to get you to do something for her that you didn't want to do, or she was trying to make you soften you up or something. She had this little thing that she did, and to win an argument or to gain favor or whatever reason for doing it, and whatever she thought it did for her, at that point in time, it didn't do her any good to do that with me, because we had already been through a horrendous time in her life when she had all kinds of little tricks that aggravated me more than they helped her. But looking back on that at this time, and I think about her doing that little thing that she did with her mouth, that just anyway, I agreed finally to sell her the thing for $80. And she did a little thing with her mouth. And she said, I don't have $80. I only have $40. And I said, okay. And I said, you can pay me whatever you want to, whenever you want to. So she took the thing, and the rest of it, I just read you in the story. She took it to Uncle Cobb, and he finished it for her. As I've already said, this was special to me because it belonged to Diane. Diane was she was what the world knew as a special person. And I'm going to say a couple more things about her, and then I'm going to have to end this video on this, because I don't think I can talk about Diane right now without blubbering. But Paul Mitchell is a man who's in his early 90s now, but when I was in the 6th grade, he was my teacher, and later on he became the principal at Lincoln School. He taught me, and he taught Kurt, and he taught Diane in the 6th grade. I don't think he taught Amy. Amy might have started at Lincoln School. I think she did, but then our family moved, and I think Amy finished at Parkview School, and I don't know if Clint ever went to Lincoln School. But if he did, he never got to the place where Paul Mitchell was teacher. But Paul Mitchell was, he's still a good friend of mine today, and he calls me up and talks to me on the phone about, I don't know, once every month or so. If I haven't seen him for a while, he just calls up and checks with me, and always speaks when we're out, and I play golf with him some. It's pretty sick. My game's got to the point where he competes with me fairly evenly at 93 years old, and he enjoys that. But he told me one time, he said, of all the Mooneyham children, and he said, I was really fond of the Mooneyham children, and your parents did a really good job of raising your children. He said, Diane was my favorite student. And I said, well, Paul, that surprised me. I always thought I was your favorite. And he said, no, it was Diane. And he said, not only was Diane my favorite Mooneyham, she was my favorite student of all time, I think. And so she was and still is special to him and his memory. I have met people. In fact, just a couple of months ago, I was at the Wiley Art Gallery, and I was talking to somebody there, and there was a lady over to the side, two ladies, actually. One that was a lady and her mother, and the lady was probably 50 some years old, and she'd have been older than that. She would have been middle 60s, and she heard me introduce myself to this other person. I told her my name was Luke Mooneyham, and so she stood politely over there until I'd finished my conversation. She stepped up to me and she said, "Are you Luke Mooneyham, Diane Mooneyham's brother?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And she said, Diane, and then she just went on about Diane, about what a wonderful person she was. And she said something, she said, Diane was my best friend. And that in itself is not unusual, except for this. Over the course of my life, since Diane died in 1985 when she was 34 years old, but since that time until now, I have had that same experience at least 3 times, and maybe 4 or even more than that, where someone became aware that my name was Mooneyham, Luke Mooneyham, and they knew me as Diane's older brother, and they told me a story similar to that. And then they told me that Diane was their best friend. How special is that that many people can think that Diane Mooneyham was their best friend? I'm going to have to end it here. We'll pick us up over there, talking about that mirror in the next episode of the Hard Times Chronicles. Till then, I'm the Hard Times guy. Have a good day.